Welcome to the Andy Staples Show, coming to you from the Redneck Riviera, a lovely courtyard by Marriott. Can't you tell from the couch and the art on the wall? It's beautiful. If you're listening to this through your phone in podcast form, I apologize. But, go to the YouTube channel, subscribe, like, whatever you do, follow, do that. You can watch me and Seth Emerson, the Athletics Georgia writer, Aaron Suttles, the Athletics Alabama writer. We're discussing one of the most eventful days in the history of the SEC's spring meetings. I mean, it was a lot, guys. We had the fallout of Nick Saban versus Jimbo Fisher, which everybody was supposed to be on their best behavior. Greg Sankey took the football coaches into executive session and I guess read them the riot act.
We don't know because it was executive secret session.
That's right. Double secret session. So we don't know exactly what was said there, but we know that Nick Saban and Jimbo Fisher didn't say anything inflammatory. Jimbo Fisher didn't say anything publicly at all. Nick Saban, well, we'll get to that in a second, but we had simultaneously that. Then you had the scheduling conversation of, do they stay at 8 games? Do they go to 9 games? It certainly appears divisions are dead in the SEC once the new teams show up.
Sankey basically told us that.
Yeah,
in answer to my question, his words were only looking at the single division model, which that is such a administrator talk, verbal. Yeah. Single division. In other words, no divisions.
It's like I'm giving you some news here.
Yeah,
but
I'm not going to say it in a very quotable, tweetable way.
Yeah, I'm not going to give it to you in so many words.
Right.
So you have that, and then you have the NIL stuff, which is just, overarching everything going on. And then Greg Sankey going in on the playoff and giving us more detail than he's given on the playoff. But Aaron, let's start with that coach that you cover, Nick Saban. He got asked a question right out of the chute.
Oh yeah,
that was, well, let's just listen to it.
That's always been my major concern. So, with that, questions.
Coach Olin Buchanan, TexAgs.com. What evidence did you have that Texas A&M bought its entire recruiting class?
I didn't really say that anybody did anything wrong.
Well, you said they bought their recruiting class.
I didn't say anybody did anything wrong, okay? And I've said everything I'm going to say about this. But, I think that, I guess the point, and I should have never mentioned any individual institutions. I said that before. But, some kind of uniform name, image, and likeness, standard that supports some kind of equitable national competition. I think is really, really important in college athletics, in college football. And we've always had that, whether it's equal scholarships, equal Alston money, whatever it might be.
Very good for one Nick Saban.
It absolutely has.
And look, he did go on to say some things that are legitimate. Athletes need to be protected from bad deals, from bad actors, people who may be claiming to represent them, who get them to sign things that are not valid, or they think they're signing one thing and they're actually signing another. So he did have some legitimate points.
This is all, by the way, great talk that nothing tangible can happen with that.
Translation.
Yes.
Yeah, because nobody thinks anybody did anything wrong.
I think most people agree, most of those coaches agree with Nick Saban. He got caught up where he said the wrong words.
Yes.
He said bought, and he named programs.
Yes.
If he doesn't do any of that, all the other coaches in the league are, we agree with you.
I would argue that 14 of the 14 coaches agree with him, including Jimbo Fisher.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because it's sort of I wrote a column on Tuesday that basically my theory is the longer you have left in your working life, the less likely are you are to really complain about anything else, because you're like, this is something I'm gonna have to deal with forever.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna. So like Billy Napier, 42 years old, whatever. He's like going over the history of the SEC and what the SEC used to give out.
Very well.
Yeah.
Like if you haven't, when you're listening to this or watching this, seen what Billy Napier said, read Andy's story because you have the quote.
I tweeted it
or
too.
look it up.
Yeah.
I quoted it too.
Yep.
He put it in a way that I think a lot of people who are still holdouts on NIL can understand, that the payout for SEC teams in 1990 was like 1.3 million.
Yeah.
And look at what coaches' salaries. We always talk about like how much more money has gotten into college football. And Billy Napier's point was, well, the players need a piece of that pie too. So it's just kind of natural that they're getting it now.
Yeah, and it really does feel like it's generational, because Eli Drinkwitz, somebody was actually, Aaron, you asked him about trying to hold on to assistant coaches when people can recruit off your roster, and Eli Drinkwitz kind of stopped you and he's like, listen, I flew down here on a private plane. I'm at the beach. Like, you're not getting to pour me about any of this stuff for me.
Yeah.
and then Lane Kiffin, who's in his mid 40s, was like, I don't like this, but you have to adapt, because
adapt or die.
Yeah. Because there were so many coaches who didn't adapt.
And I also would, sorry, but I'd say Kirby Smart, who's my age, 46, has said the same kind of things over the years. I remember him in 2019. A couple years before NIL fully came into effect, but it would look like it was going to, talking about Rodrigo Blankenship and saying, well, he missed his window, but you know,
dude sold so many rec specs.
Yep. Yeah. And so someone like Kirby was like understanding that, like that's what NIL was supposed to be for, was for people like that who could monetize their name, image, likeness. That's what NIL stands for, while they were at their max value. Now it's turned into something else, which was entirely predictable.
Yeah. And Nick Saban is going to be cast in this as unadaptable, which is completely opposite of why we say he's an all-time great.
Adaptability is his superpower.
And he will. He's just asking the question, basically, where are we going with this? The equitable is the word that keeps being used.
But this is
the wrong word.
This is everyone's fault, by the way. This goes back to like the story I did on Greg Shaheen, the NCAA guy who
was vice president.
Who was saying behind the scenes, we need to get with basically the program here. And he was saying this in 2009.
Yeah.
Nobody listened to him. He ended up getting basically pushed out. And it's the fact that we are living in a land of no laws, as Billy Napier said, the fact that there are no,
I like that better than Wild Wild West, by the way.
Yeah.
Living in a land of no laws.
All of this,
elegant.
This lack of guardrails, this lack of regulation, it's the NCAA and the conferences and schools' fault. It's not your fault, Andy Staples, and people like us who have been saying for years these guys deserved name, image, likeness. It's not the fault of the Supreme Court and the California state legislature which started this. It's the fault of college administrators for not seeing the train coming down the road.
Eli Drinkwitz said it pretty well too. He basically said, he was talking about athletes, and he goes, we got to start making decisions for them and not us. And that's how you avoid getting into the situation they're in right now. But yeah, with Nick Saban, this is, and Aaron, I wanted to discuss this with you, because we've seen this before. We've seen him, I'm just asking mode.
Right.
You know, is this what we want football to be in regard to spread offenses? And that was basically him saying, well, if your answer is yes, I'm going to do it with better players and kick your ass. And he has adapted to all the rule changes for oversigning were aimed squarely at Nick Saban.
Yep.
And he adapted and recruited better than everybody else. This is one. And here's the thing. All politics are local. Of course, he would like things to be as close to the way they were as possible, or what NIL was originally pitched as, because that's great for Alabama.
Absolutely.
Because they can get the best players first. And then once you already have the best players, then you have an even more prohibitive of an advantage, because they can make more money.
Right.
But the way it's worked out, which everybody could have foreseen, and Lane Kiffin said right off the bat, was that competitors will compete and they will pay them for their value as football players. And that opens the door for a Texas A&M, a Florida, a Miami, a Tennessee that maybe has not been competing with the Alabamas, Georgias, and Ohio States for these players.
Here's the thing. Alabama can compete to a certain extent. And I think Florida and Miami and Tennessee can. They can't compete with Texas A&M or Texas.
In terms of money, sheer money.
I think people are under the illusion that their favorite program just has endless coffers. That is not the case. Texas programs might have.
Well, these are actual people. All of these people are actual people who got rich not by being stupid.
Yeah.
So they're not going to just waste their money on something that they feel like there's no return on investment.
Yeah.
they are going to be reluctant to give money to something that isn't guaranteed to be a tax break for them.
Yeah.
So and you're right. As we sit here with oil at $120 a
Insane.
barrel,
Yeah.
Texas and Texas A&M
Have a distinct advantage.
probably feeling pretty good.
Yeah, and they also have hunger on their side.
Yes.
You mentioned earlier, Alabama's got 6 national championships. Texas A&M doesn't.
No.
So
1939 was a long time ago.
humans get complacent after a while. So Texas A&M fans are going to be a lot more willing to pony up than this. You keep going to the same Alabama people, and well, we've won.
Georgia has caught up in facilities over the last less than a decade. Through it's nearly like $200 million they've spent on 3 big facilities, including an indoor facility, and they've done that mostly through donor money,
Right.
because of hunger to win that
And
championship.
that's what Texas
which
A&M is.
now they got one, and we'll see if that converts over in NIL. But that equates to what
that you want to give out.
Good word, satiated. By the way, I like that word a lot, and I'm glad you. Yeah,
There you go.
But yeah, that is an example of what could be coming down the road for Texas
Well,
and Texas
and
A&M.
Texas
The
A&M
desperation.
Texas A&M just announced $120. It's a very cheap project. A $120 million capital project that's going to build a new indoor football facility for the football team, a new academic center for all the athletes, and I believe a new indoor track. So they are shelling out some coin,
And they've got it.
yeah. And their collectives and that was the thing I went to that I wrote about a few weeks ago, where they were meeting with those big donors and basically telling them, hey, you choose how you want to do this, but we would like you to do both. Please, please continue to give us money to build buildings, and please donate to the collective, because we're going to need this.
I still think the collective money is going to pale in comparison
do
to
too,
the
because
facility money.
Until you can guarantee that it's a tax write-off, I think that's a
Which
big problem.
huge concern.
Yeah.
And I still think at the end of the day, even with Texas, eventually it's not sustainable.
I don't think it's sustainable either. And I think this market will figure itself out if they just let it.
Yeah.
But they're going to keep freaking out about this because they like
it's
control.
the latest problem.
Well, and one of the things Nick Saban kept saying is, well, there needs to be a system of transparency. And I just laughed, because every private industry in America has to figure out how much to pay employees, and they don't, like, it doesn't get posted somewhere on a wall.
There's a lack of transparency. They tell you not to ask your coworkers what they make.
Well, yes.
You also talk about, like, I think there's this expectation that somebody's going to do something about it. Who?
Yeah.
Who's gonna, like, we are in this position. I was talking tonight, or Tuesday night, at the SEC event with Craig Robinson, who's head of the National Association of Basketball Coaches.
Former Oregon State coach, right?
Former Oregon State coach. His brother-in-law was
Famous guy.
He had a
famous,
pretty big job.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. But so he's here to speak to the basketball coaches, and I was kind of telling him, like, the same thing, that people think something's going to be done when in fact this is how it's going to be. Like, NIL is here to stay, and who is going to do something about it? They would need federal legislation. Who's going to do it? This is here because of court cases. And Craig was saying, I know that, you know that. I'm still trying to explain that to my coaches.
Well,
they think something's going to be done,
Seth,
when they don't understand this is it.
Yeah, Seth, you and I were talking to somebody tonight who was saying, well, they better enjoy it now because it's going to change. And I'm like, no, it's not. Once this freedom has been granted, you will never be able to get it back.
I do wonder if the SEC made it a condition upon remaining in the conference voluntarily.
Oh, a sanity code? That worked out real well for the NCAA.
I wonder.
You know,
you being in this conference, you have to give. Everyone's got to do this. I wonder if everyone.
Now, I will say that might work if they do it and no one else does, because if there's another option,
players will go there.
Well, but then you're competing, and if someone sues you in federal court on antitrust grounds, they'll say, well, they can go play over there if they don't like our system.
If everybody does it, I think you're getting into collusion.
Well,
where baseball got into problems,
that's where they got into problems. Basically, every NCAA rule capping income was collusion, or is considered collusion based on the interpretation of that 9-0 Supreme Court decision. So, but again, if each conference did have different rules, then they could say it's not collusion.
Yeah.
And
you have an option to go somewhere else to make that money. It just is not.
So, but all three of us have covered the SEC for a long time.
Well, why did the SEC, the SEC states the SEC footprint was the first
Yeah.
one.
This is a league that
but they didn't start it.
Yeah.
Like California started it, and when
Right.
California with Gavin Newsom and LeBron James had that ceremony and say
Yeah.
that was for 2023.
Yeah.
And it was, and at
Yeah.
first, like people in our part of the world were like, "Oh, those commie liberals in California trying to ruin." And then after
And then
a
they're
little
like,
bit,
wait a second.
Yeah.
That's a free market.
and
Let's
then,
go.
And then pretty soon, I'm covering an NIL press conference
Yeah.
where Brian Kemp and Republican legislatures are talking about how great this is and everything.
Well, this league. Oh, I did it this league, didn't I? The SEC is never going to do something that will hurt the SEC's chances to win the national title in
They'll
football.
never put itself as a competitive disadvantage.
So let us use logic as we discuss this. And logically speaking, the SEC will never, ever harm its chances to win the national title in football. So they could say that, and they can talk a huge game about that. But the second the ACC is like, well, we'll just keep the rules the way they are, we're good. And suddenly kids are going to Miami and Florida State and Clemson instead of Alabama and Georgia and LSU.
Yes, that's
over.
Football, college football may be a regionalized sport at this point, but as long as there are other options in this region, the SEC can't.
And this is
by
the region
fiat.
that wants to dominate.
Yeah.
So, and if the Big Ten did it, which they would be the less likely to try to do something like that. But if they did, and then suddenly players that would have gone to Georgia and Alabama and LSU go to Michigan State or Michigan or Ohio State, then again, they would change it the next day.
I can see a very real scenario where this might drive Nick Saban out of college football.
Well, and that was where I was going with that, because he has adapted so many times.
He can't adapt to this.
It's not the easy.
Right.
He cannot make Alabama a wealthier state with more rich people.
Right.
Like it has what it has. And Texas has what it has, and Georgia has what it has, and Florida has what it has. You're talking about 3 very heavily populated states that there are just more rich people in.
Yep.
And Georgia doesn't share
that. Florida has to split it with a bunch, but
and Alabama has to split it with Auburn.
Yeah,
and not as many people as are in Georgia.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. You're right. It's not something he can fix. He's fixed everything else.
He can't fix this.
So, but and I wondered if there would be something, even if it was something he could fix, where he said, you know what, I've done this enough times. I don't want to do this anymore. Because that's the real game changer. Is he's the one who has dominated. He's the one who has made Alabama what it is, but also made the SEC what it is. Like, let's be perfectly honest. I mean, a lot of that is built on what Saban has done at Alabama. So that is, I think that's sort of the most interesting thing to watch as this goes is that something he cares to do?
Yeah.
Because if anybody can solve it, it's him. But you're right. It may be unsolvable for him.
As it currently stands, it is. And my only question is I always, when this conversation comes up about Saban and retirement, what else is that man going to do?
I know.
He's not going to run those Mercedes dealerships.
But if he decides this is more than he wants to do or something he doesn't want to do, and that's what I was getting at with the generational thing, where Billy Napier's looking at this like, this is what I've chosen.
I have to do this.
I make a really good. My wife's going to kick my ass if I walk away from $6 million a year. Like this is what I'm doing for the next 25 to 30 years, hopefully. So that's where I think a lot of those guys are at, and why I think ultimately they'll get it figured out. They'll adapt to it. There might be some sort of guardrails put up. There might be some kind of CBA situation down the road where they are employees, because it's just easier for them to deal with at that point. But they'll figure it out. Let's move to something that they're going to figure out a lot sooner, and that's the SEC schedule, because they had over 30 models presented to them. You've read about, if you read The Athletic, you've read about Navigate Research, this company that gets hired by a lot of these conferences to do some things. So a few years ago, the SEC hired Navigate to look at multiple new scheduling models. Now, at the time, it was with the idea of a 14-team league, indefinitely. Then they add Texas and Oklahoma. Now it's for a 16-team league. Out of the 30 models they were presented, they very quickly eliminated most of them. Based on our conversations today, Greg Sankey said a couple things. Lane Kipp said something, and then us talking off to the side with folks. There are 2 models left. There is a stay at 8 games for the conference schedule, 1 fixed opponent per team, 7 rotating opponents. And then there is a 3-6 model where they go to 9 conference games. There are 3 permanent opponents. The other teams rotate through twice every 4 years.
And either way, no divisions.
Either divisions are dead, which, I mean, the Pac-12 eliminating divisions within seconds of the NCAA changing that rule should have told you.
Right, where this is headed.
The ACC's eliminating divisions.
I think they were getting rid of divisions.
They were always
before
going
Texas
to.
and Oklahoma.
Yeah, they were always going to. The Big Ten is eliminating divisions. And here's why. Because I know I get a lot of people think, oh, but divisions are so historic. Well, no, they're not. I mean,
they got rid of divisions in basketball.
Yeah.
Like a decade
Yeah,
ago. Well, when Texas A&M and Missouri came in, and no one really batted an eye.
Yeah, in a 90-year-old conference, divisions have been around for 30. So
It's not that big.
it's not. And the other part of it is divisions are why you probably complain about your team's home schedule and why you maybe, if you're a season ticket holder, going back and forth about renewing. Seth, you cover Georgia.
Yeah.
I live in Gainesville. Those 2 schools especially, they do not like how boring their schedule has gotten.
You and I talked about this.
Yeah.
We people demagogue the non-conference scheduling. And like, why is Georgia playing Canisius, Northwest State, and whatnot? As many, when you get the real gate receipts for games, which I request every year, those games, those non-conference games, are about as well attended as when Georgia hosts Vanderbilt and Kentucky and Missouri and teams like that.
So you're saying if Alabama, Texas, Oklahoma, LSU showed up more often, that those would be better attended.
If you have it, and that's why I think you're going to end up at 3-6, because the 8-game schedule, 8 versus 9, it doesn't work for 8 with 1 permanent opponent. Aaron and I both cover programs where you lose a pretty storied rival.
Right. Georgia would lose Auburn, and Alabama would lose Tennessee.
Right.
And I will tell you, like, again, let's just use some logic. And here's why 1-7 has no shot, no chance to succeed. Because 1-7 means that you would have a conference that has Texas and Texas A&M in it. And you wouldn't have Texas playing Texas A&M every year. Like, everyone in charge would need to quit their jobs, hang their heads in jail, like do the shame walk from Game of Thrones with the septa yelling shame as everyone walks in.
No one's told me this, but that's why I think 1-7 is one of the final 2 options as sort of a poison pill.
Yeah.
So that, because by comparison, people then go, we can't do that. Okay, let's do the 3-6, which is what the SEC office and the Georgias, Alabama's, LSU's teams,
and
like
a certain large-eared mouse that is going to own all their TV rights in 2024.
I've had multiple SEC ADs tell me that the 9-game schedule is going to force other schools to better their schedule.
Yes,
because listen, Alabama and Georgia and Florida, to an extent, if you look how far they've scheduled out, they understand that attendance is a big issue in the future.
Alabama, Georgia, Oklahoma, Clemson. These are programs that already get this, that have been doing this all along.
You have to give your fans reason to show up.
Yeah.
And
Alabama just came around to it, but Georgia's come around to it. Oklahoma is probably the best example of a program that's been doing this all along. But you want to know why? Look at Oklahoma's Big 12 home schedule, because they don't play Texas at home.
Yep. And so if you go to an game, it at least forces another one of those games to give their fans something they want.
Yeah.
And there's a feeling among certain SEC ADs that some schools won't do it voluntarily, so they're going to have to drag them to do it.
Yes. And now the issue is the schools that schedule for bowl eligibility want to be bowl eligible still, and
there's no way around that. Just get rid of the 6-win criteria.
Exactly. You are the schools.
Yeah.
You make the rules, and guess what? Everybody in the Big Ten would be fine doing that too. So, because here's the thing, you could move it down to 5. I'm all for eliminating it. And then you have Mississippi State, Minnesota in the Boca Raton Bowl. I'd rather watch that.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess there's a stigma with being 5-7 versus 6-6. But as soon as you're letting 6-6 in bowls, then what's the point? Yeah, I think the I don't know if I'm picking on Kentucky too much here.
You shouldn't pick on Kentucky. Mark Stoops says the best job in America, and he's a miracle worker.
But like programs like Kentucky seem to me to be the ones that are kind of the holdouts, because they go to 9 conference games. They say, well, then we're already playing Louisville, so that only leaves us 2 basically gimme games.
Right.
What I think, if you look at when you get into the weeds on who the permanent opponents would be, the bigger programs are going to tend to play the bigger programs. The smaller programs are going to tend to play the smaller.
I think it's going to be big,
small. Which means, like, for instance, Kentucky's.
We got to talk about what y'all did.
Playing Tennessee and Vanderbilt, and
we got to talk about what y'all did, because y'all did a story last week where you did potential, 3 permanent rivalries, and you guys just murdered Auburn and Texas A&M. Just murdered them.
All right.
Yeah, it's rough.
Yeah.
Real rough.
So here's the deal. Auburn has to have Alabama and Georgia, right?
Yep.
Yes.
So guess who else they have to have?
Vanderbilt.
That's exactly right. You can't give them, because here are the other.
I think it's where the analytical part, when they're talking about future scheduling,
has to be
playing in.
So here, and you can change this after a period of years if you need to. But here's who the other 3 for Auburn could be if you just did historical rivalries: LSU, Florida, or Tennessee. They don't want any of that either. Like, you can absolutely murder Auburn.
Those programs also have enough of their own to choose from.
Right.
There's enough. I think that's the beauty of the 3-6 setup is within your 3, you keep all these permanent rivalries. But let's say from Georgia's standpoint, they'll get South Carolina as their 3rd one, even though most would choose Tennessee. But someone who watched Brandon Bennett go over the goal line between the hedges back in the day.
Yeah. Who may have been a South Carolina fan as a teenager.
For South Carolina's benefit, though, they need to get Georgia.
Yeah,
because that's their one.
Absolutely.
So Georgia's going to get South Carolina as their 3rd choice, which means they only play Tennessee twice every 4 years, which isn't ideal, but it's still twice every 4 years. And you add a little bit of a specialness to it.
You still might get
it's still better than only playing Texas A&M once since they entered the league.
And that's the thing. Georgia will play Texas A&M and LSU every once in a while.
And Oklahoma. They will play all these teams
twice every 4 years. Yeah. That's the part I've never understood, because I've been writing about this since 2019. And
I wrote the SEC should get rid of divisions column when I wrote for a former publication.
Yes.
So it was
before you
2017, maybe earlier. And people said I was nuts.
Yeah. This was proposed.
Well,
this was proposed by
Look at me now.
This was proposed by Texas A&M in like 2017 or 2018. I think it was 2017. And it's been percolating because ADs like Scott Strickland from Florida, Josh Brooks from Georgia, they want to fill their stadium. They want to sell seats. Because we talk about everything being done for television. There's still a significant amount of money being made from season tickets. Now, Alabama and Georgia, the 2 teams you
gets back to, like, how many times do you look at when you tweet out this is the team's home schedule this year, and they say, that's a terrible home schedule, and a number of those are SEC games, because it's
I feel like it's more of an issue in the East than it is.
It's definitely more of an issue in the East. The West schools are going to have some fun. If you're Texas A&M, you're getting Alabama every other year, you're getting LSU every other year, you're getting Auburn every other year.
I mean, even now, like,
but I think the West schools are going to like it, because they're going to get Vanderbilt and Missouri and South Carolina a little bit more.
Like it for the people in the seats.
No, but you're going to get you're going to trade.
You're
going to trade a little bit of the, you're going to trade a little bit more prestige from the West teams for having a little bit more, and you'll have a mix.
Even Vandy's attendance is going to go up, because the at Vanderbilt for the schools that don't get to go to Vanderbilt all the time, like the trip to Nashville, they're going to go. Like, they're going to be super excited.
It's not uncommon to see the visiting team.
I saw that this past year, and I see that pretty much every time Georgia goes there.
Yeah. So I think that is a bigger component to this than people want to. And this is what I've been saying all along. When the people from the other leagues complain about the SEC playing 8 conference games, and that's listen, they're still going to compete for national titles with 9, but it had nothing to do with what anybody else was doing. Market forces are pushing them to 9. And like ESPN's going to put its thumb on the scale. I know Greg Sankey said, "Oh, we keep our TV partners informed," but we don't. No.
Yeah.
ESPN's like, please do that.
Yeah. Which is where the college football playoff expansion comes into this discussion.
Yes, which is our next topic, by the way. Glad that is a dynamite transition here. So, Greg Sankey was being very lighthearted and jovial about all of this stuff about Jimbo versus Nick and everything else. In fact, he's even had a little fun with Brian Kelly. I will narrate for those of you who are listening, but this was quite a moment here. We're all interviewing Brian Kelly upstairs. Greg Sankey comes up behind him. Brian Kelly has no idea he's there and gets a very interesting question.
Good coverage and media, but they weren't wrestling in there. I can tell you that. There was no.
Is the worst part about being in a conference you have to deal with the commissioner now?
No,
over your shoulder.
Oh, Sankey's right here.
Media.
Yeah. It's
Media setting him up.
No, he's been great.
He asked you a softball.
Yeah, exactly.
That's Greg Sankey. He asked you a softball. Yeah, so Brett McMurphy asked this question of, now that you're in a, which is a great line, because he's left Notre Dame. He's in a conference.
Bizarre to see him.
All right. And Greg Sankey is standing there behind Brian Kelly, who has no idea that Greg Sankey's standing there. Yeah. And then some cop, I don't know who it was, goes, he's over your shoulder. Come on. You killed. I want to know what he would have said now.
I have nothing on that.
Yeah.
I was just thinking of when we went to Starbucks and Brian Kelly ran past us and said he had to go up to his hotel room.
It's very
it was
cold in
in
those
here.
meeting
Yeah,
rooms.
yeah.
So the man who just lived in South Bend for the last 12 years got frozen out. But Sankey was in a great mood, was very lighthearted until someone asked about the playoff. And the question was about the whole idea of the SEC tournament season ending, which I wrote about in February. Pete Thamel wrote about it last week. It is percolated as a conversation topic, even though it doesn't seem like it's a real thing. It feels like leverage is what it feels like.
Because the SEC is the one conference that can say that, and it's not
right.
It's not laughable.
It actually could.
Ratings would be incredible.
Right.
And yes, some network would pay a lot of money for that. So, but it's probably not what they're going to do.
And it's not good for college football.
And Greg Sankey's like, no, that's not leverage. That lives in a folder somewhere. And but it is leverage. Yeah. And then he gets very serious all of a sudden. He's like, listen, the 12-year first college football playoff contract runs out at the end of the 2020-25 season.
And we have no plan beyond
that. After that,
nothing. We have literally nothing. That was his quote.
Yes.
We have nothing. So,
and he got very specific about some of the things. The most expansive he's ever been about the topic of an 8-team playoff. And we've reported this a few times because Sankey has been pretty clear that the basics of it, they want more at-larges than there are now. There are 4 at-larges now. They would be good with more. And so an 8-team playoff, he's like, if it's the 8 best, by all means, let's rock and roll. If it's not, if it's 6 AQs and 2 at-larges,
I'm not on board.
And he said, and he gave the example. He says that if you take the number 8 team out and say, nope, not you, you don't get to do this, and put the number 20 team in
because of AQs.
Right. That is not a sustainable playoff model. Now, I would say
some people would push back on that.
Yeah, right. I think he would say that because his team's never going to be in that position. But the Pac-12 champ might be in that position. The ACC champ might be in that position. We'll see what happens with the new Big 12. I don't think the new Big 12 champ is going to ever be in that position. I think they're going to be in the top 8 or 9 or 10 or whatever. But it is going to be, an issue if you do that for some people. And so that's why. And they have all the leverage now. Now, our friend James Crepia, who works in Oregon now, but somehow managed to wrangle it. He used to cover Auburn. Somehow managed to wrangle a trip to Destin, Florida.
Likes the beaches.
Yeah.
Asks some really penetrating,
questions
lengthy questions
about sports that can split up scholarships. So not football or basketball. So
love James. Hopefully he's not credentialed next year. I love you, James.
No,
seriously,
he
yes,
tried to ask the money question. Not about money, but the $64,000 question. Because George Kliavkoff, the Pac-12 commissioner, did say in December, hey, if we wanted to change the playoff early before the contract ran out, it had to be a unanimous vote of the 10 conferences and Notre Dame. But the next time around doesn't have to be. And so James is going through majority, supermajority, and Greg Sankey's just shooting this all down. He does not want to answer this. He does not want to answer this question. But the truth of the matter is, they don't all have to agree to do something like that. Now, what Sankey said, basically, again, comes back to, and this is the source of his frustration with this, I think. They're going to finish at 12. They're going to argue about it.
They're just not doing it now because of spite.
Right. They're gonna do it, and
maybe a little bit because Fox wants in.
Well, but they would have gotten in anyway. That's the part nobody understands. Like, if they'd have done the new the proposal that Sankey and Craig Thompson and Jack Swarbrick and Bob Bowlesby made, there would have been a new round of those games played on campus. That first round, ESPN would have no claim to that, because the ones that are played in bowls, yes, ESPN has a contractual claim to those games. The other ones would have been a completely new product if Fox wanted to buy them, and you could have been like, wink, wink, hey, Fox, if you want to really get in on this thing, then when the deal ends, you can overpay for these next couple of years. And so they're going to sell it to a bunch of different networks. That's going to happen. I know the fear is that ESPN will take it. I don't think anybody's going to let that happen. There's too much money in it to split it up. So,
especially when you throw streaming in.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So they're going to probably come up with something that looks exactly like what those four guys came up with.
Much like when we look at the 3-6 scheduling model, you look at it and you go, this just makes too much sense.
Well, that's why I talked to Jack Swarbrick, the Notre Dame AD, at the ACC meetings, and very similar to Sankey when they talk about this, like, it's like their head's going to explode, because they just know it's like in Zoolander, Mugatu. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. Like,
my favorite thing in the picture is Greg Sankey on January 11th in Indianapolis. How smug he must have been.
Oh yeah.
With two of his teams in the championship.
Oh, he said it
after the whole thing.
He said it like 5 days later at Georgia's celebration at Sanford Stadium. This thing, I think a 14 playoff worked out great. But to get back to what we were talking about this, trial balloon, if that's even what it is, of an SEC only playoff, which I think I mentioned in our private Slack channel like last year, basically for fun, and SEC basically take its ball and go home. All right, we'll make our own playoff. We've got Texas and Oklahoma now, but like the thing is, whatever you want to say about ratings, Georgia and Alabama twice being the national championship game has more luster because Georgia and Alabama went through other teams first. Georgia having clobbered Michigan. Right. And then 5 years ago, I guess now, Georgia having that classic Rose Bowl game against Oklahoma.
Yep.
Alabama beating Clemson along the way, beating Cincinnati along the way this year. That you do need the other conferences. You need the supporting characters.
Well, you absolutely do, because if you want it to be a national proposition, this is my thing, they have to have a way so that the country is represented. Every region of the country needs to, right. It's good for the sport. Everybody makes more money that way, and it kind of makes things more interesting during the regular season. So this is the frustration from Sankey, from Swarbrick, from Bowlesby, which kind of shocked me, because I thought with the Big 12 that they would want the AQ for themselves, want to be guaranteed a spot for their champion. But he said he feels like his lawsuit bait. So he didn't even want it, which is crazy. So that they've got to figure that out. The Big Ten, I don't understand why Kevin Warren is so intent on having an AQ
personal. Like, we're just going to do this to spite.
Because the Big Ten champion is never not going to be one of the 6 highest ranked champs. Never.
My theory is it goes back to 2020, COVID year. SEC played on. Notre Dame could have been.
Well, the ACC played on too, and Jim Phillips was the biggest obstructionist in all this.
And Notre Dame jumped in. Well, Jim Phillips was in the Big Ten in 2020.
That's true.
Notre Dame could have probably ended it, but when they said we're going to play on and we're going to stay in, and
Force their hand.
Yeah, and then Big 12 obviously was the linchpin, and
Yeah.
that night, that Tuesday night, August 12th, 2020.
Not that we remember.
Well, I wrote a big story on it. It was just a couple months of my life.
I feel like
working
my
on that
job
story.
got saved that night.
Yeah,
I'll be honest with
yeah,
you.
and so I wonder if a lot of that was. I mean, look at
It feels very personal.
Yeah.
Even you talk about Sankey when he got serious. The whole thing feels very personal.
Yes, but on all accounts,
Yeah.
all around.
Yes.
And so I think what they're saying, and I think Greg Sankey's still taking it personally. It sure sounds like, but at some point, those people, and at some point soon, those people are gonna have to get together, and they're gonna need to hammer this out. Yeah. And so just do it.
We said, it's going to 12.
Yeah, I think that's it, and that may be saying
it makes too much sense. There's too much money
mm-hmm.
for everybody. It benefits too many people.
Right, and that's the level of frustration from the four guys who made the original plan. Was this gave something to everybody?
Yep.
And I feel like Sankey's going to be a little more of a hardline negotiator because he said, well, maybe the SEC won't support the idea of the 4 teams with byes must be conference champs. Yeah. And you know what? They now have the leverage to get that if they want it. Because again, the Big Ten is the only league that other than the SEC that matters in this.
Do you think he was playing coy Tuesday night in his answer about an SEC only playoff, or other people? My read on it was he was playing coy. Other people's read on it was he was basically saying,
I think
we're not
he
really
wants
doing
people to think in the back of their minds that this is their nuclear option.
We don't have a plan now. Get a plan together, or
that's what I think. Yeah, I think he's continuing to play coy a little bit and saying, there's no deal. There's nothing happening in 2026 would be the first season.
That season.
There's nothing happening then. So we've got 16 teams now. Yeah, we'll do our own playoff as a default if you don't do anything, and you guys are going to have a playoff without us. Okay.
It's going to be fascinating, guys. I appreciate it. I've kept you way too long tonight. We have a trip to the Red Bar for tomorrow night that we must plan.
Don't tell everyone where we're going to be.
You think people want to come see us? Woo! Let's go see a bunch of sports writers eat some grouper. That's not really.
Aaron's got some groupies.
The grouper's amazing.
Am I not allowed to talk about that on the air?
Grouper,
okay, all right.
Grouper groupies? What are we talking about?
No, Aaron Suttles definitely does not have groupies or stalkers.
Absolutely not.
So we're not going to talk about that.
None. No. Thanks so much for listening. Stars Matter on Thursday with Ari Wasserman, Mitch Light. All the recruiting news that's fit to yak about. And then on Friday, we'll be back probably talking a little more SEC because there may be a little more clarity on that schedule. We'll talk to you then.
It's pretty good.